Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to begin the funeral services of Dr. Stanley G. Rabinowitz. For those of you who are online, we welcome you. For those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your cell phones are turned off, not to disturb the sacred funeral ceremony. Rabbi Stephen Stark Lowenstein and Cantor Julie Staple from Am Shalom will be officiating. It's at this time he's going to perform the ancient ceremony of Kriya, of tearing of the ribbon, with the family.
In the Torah, when we would hear of the death of a loved one, our ancestors would tear their clothes. Jacob, on hearing the death of the death of his son Joseph, the first thing he did was he tore his clothes. We no longer tear our clothes, but we make a small little tear in a ribbon to serve as a reminder of our hearts that are torn. Even the most skilled, even the best seamstress in the world, if they repaired the ribbon that you're wearing, it would still leave a mark, because we're all going to have a mark on our heart for an incredible man. Someone who is so special, someone who is so loving, someone who made this world so much better by the way he lived, by the way he laughed, by the way he loved. We're going to feel that mark. Only direct mourners are obligated to wear a Kriya ribbon, and in the Jewish tradition, direct mourners are spouses, children, siblings, and parents. And so to the three direct mourners here, I ask that you rise. To know that while you stand, you're not alone. There's lots of people by your side. There's lots of people behind you. There's lots of people online. There's lots of people that will help you walk this path. For no one can walk this path alone. For our hearts that are torn, we perform this act of Kriya. And I ask you to repeat after me these words: Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Dayan HaEmet. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, Dayan HaEmet, the judge of truth. For it's God's ultimate judgment that has taken him, and we accept that. With David Jacobson's help, we make a small little tear in this ribbon. We don't tear a piece of the ribbon off, we just tear the ribbon itself, to know that while we're still whole, we are torn, we are bereft. As it says in our tradition, B'ya'ado afid ruchi, into God's hands we entrust our spirit, when we are asleep and when we are awake, and we shall not be afraid.
Be'ado afid ruchi, be'et ishan ve'ayra, ve'im Adonai li velo ira, ve'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira. My soul I give to you, my spirit in your care. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Hold me in your hand. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Safely in your hand.
Death has taken our beloved Stanley. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Stanley's love that united us in life which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path, which now continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious, precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. We extend our deepest condolences to his family, to Harriet, an incredible partner for almost 59 years, someone who your whole life, from the time you were a teenager, your families were connected, the two of you were connected in so many wonderful ways. And the family that you built is just beautiful. To Stacy and Lowell, and to Richard and Heather, we extend our deepest condolences to you. We thank you for the incredible role that you played in your parents' lives and continue to play and will continue to play. We know that that love is just so deep. And grandchildren Rachel and Ethan and Olivia, you were the apple of his eye. So look forward to every phone call, look forward to every moment that you communicated. Keep those memories close to your heart. To extended family and friends, to all who were touched by his kindness, by his goodness, by his love, we find comfort from the words of our tradition. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart rejoice. My being is secure. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. We find comfort from the 121st Psalm. The words are so beautiful. Esa enai el ha'arim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. Stanley loved all things Jewish. And if you don't know the words of the 121st Psalm, like Stanley, just hum along, because he loved to hum. Just hum along this beautiful melody, listening to the words of over 2,000 years, the words of our biblical prophets.
Shamayim varetz, Hine lo yanum velo ishan, Shomer Yisrael, Hine lo yanum velo ishan, Shomer Yisrael, Esaena el Harim, Me'ayin yavo Ezri, Ezri, Me'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim varetz.
Dr. Stanley Rabinowitz was kind and brilliant and so very smart. You could go to him for anything, for he always had an answer. He knew so much. He loved history and ancient history, not to mention math and science. He was a true Renaissance man. He loved history and art and opera and classical music. A man who for 81 years was never one-sided. He was open and engaging, but most of all, he was super humble. A man with impeccable integrity, devoted to his family, devoted to his grandkids. He believed in hard work, setting goals in life, achieving them. He believed and exemplified the American dream of starting with nothing and really making it. Today we celebrate his life with family and friends. Today we mark this moment. The 23rd Psalm is by far the most famous of all of the Psalms. The 23rd Psalm reminds us that we walk together through the valley of the shadow of death. The operative word, the key word is we walk through the valley. The psalmist very easily could have said that we remain in the valley of the shadow of death, or that we are in the valley of the shadow of death, but the psalmist was very clear that we walk through it. I was touched by the beautiful words of Rabbi Joe Black, who wrote an explanation of the 23rd Psalm, an interpretation of the 23rd Psalm, who said, "Those who walk through the valley of the shadows wear no shoes. Their feet are cut and torn as they stumble through the darkness. With no time to pack a bag or say goodbye, they begin their journeys unprepared. Some are dressed in finery, jewels gleaming like stars in the dim night. Others are in pajamas, work clothes, prayer shawls, or bathing suits. Some clutch briefcases, papers, blankets, or teddy bears. And everyone wears their grief. With each cautious, painful step, they move further into the abyss. The chasm narrows. Stretching out their fingers, they trace the grooves carved by previous pilgrims. Handholds hewn into the cold canyon walls. Sometimes they march in silence. Other times singing hauntingly beautiful melodies, their voices echo in the very vaults of heaven. The river that created this place does not flow from on high. It was filled and formed with tears of those whose bruised souls traversed the trail. No one walks alone. Stumbling pilgrims are quickly caught and held aloft by those who travel beside them. They are caressed and carried through the brambles and branches that, unexposed and hidden from sight, add to the chaos and confusion of the journey. In time, for some, a light appears in the distance, piercing through the veil of darkness. Hope long buried rise to the surface like a beacon. And with it, the weary marchers ascend to find a world that has been changed forever by their absence. They return with pale faces and broken hearts. But now, as experienced travelers, they will always have a suitcase, packed and ready. And so we walk together through the valley of the shadow of death, each and every one of us. We walk holding up the mourners, helping you navigate this difficult path. But know that you're not alone. Together we say these words of the 23rd Psalm in the service supplement. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר. בינו דשא הרביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי שובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דשנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
In a book called God Whispers, it says, the true worth of a life is the story that it leaves behind. Tell that story well. Did he teach you about love? Did he personify genius or sensitivity? Did his life warn you of the danger of bitterness and anger? As I stand and behold the eyes of those who mourn, I realize the only difference between people in this world is not their wealth, their fame, or their success. The only difference is those that had love in their life and those who did not. For 81 years, Stanley Rabinowitz had love in his life, from his family, from his friends, from his patients and students, from the medical community here in Chicago and around the country. He had love in his life, for he was respected and cherished, especially by his family. Stacy, I begin with you. I invite you to come forward, to take a deep breath, and to come on up and pay tribute to your dad. Bring your glasses.
Okay, I got this. Okay. 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 My dad and I were very close. Prior to COVID, we spoke nearly every day on the phone. And during COVID, we all lived together for 6 months. Will and I were fortunate enough to spend the last 4 months living with my parents in Florida. Years ago, an astrologer told me that my dad and I had a karmic connection. She also told me I was psychic, but you can conclude which part of that was correct. My dad's health had been declining since he had an operation in the fall. His routine in Florida was to spend his afternoons on the couch, alternating between episodes of Gunsmoke, Fox News, CNN, and the History Channel, and then napping. And Lowell and I would spend some of our afternoons running around playing tennis or going for bike rides. My dad marveled at Lowell's energy. This past Sunday, I had a migraine. They kept me in bed all morning, but by the afternoon, I needed a change of scenery, so ice packed in hand. I plopped down next to him on the couch, and he made a joke that he wasn't watching Fox News. We spent a couple hours watching the Miami Open, joking around and talking tennis. He said Kyrgios was a great player, but a lousy sportsman, and I agreed. Rachel called and spoke with my dad and made him laugh, and when he got off the phone, he told me that girl is something. He'd spoken to Ethan the day before, and he told me he had a great conversation with him. My dad loved his grandchildren deeply and spoke about all of them often and about his deep love for them. Later that evening, my dad passed away in his sleep while watching TV, not Fox News. This was the way he wanted to go, and he told us so. He was at home with his family around and without suffering. God had heard his prayers, and I believe God gave me that migraine that day so I could spend the last afternoon with my dad. Growing up, my dad worked a lot. He was very focused on his career. He was trying to cure diseases. I loved any time I could spend with him. He was a man of routine, and he figured out a way to make me a part of that. Every Saturday, my dad would go to the Winnetka Bank, then he'd pick up the New York Times at the pharmacy, and he'd take me to the Chestnut Court bookstore, where I could select a book, and we finished off the morning with a visit to the French pastry shop, where I always got a smiley face cookie. I'll trace my love of carbs back to this time. I love spending this time with my dad, and back in those days, he was a little high-strung, and on Saturday mornings, he relaxed. My dad loved to read and wanted me to be an avid reader. And he opened an account at the bookstore so that I could buy whatever books I wanted. And I remember ordering Julie Andrews' book, The Last of the Really Great Wang Doodles, and waiting for it to come in. There wasn't prime delivery back then, so you waited a while for orders to arrive, and I still have that book in my library. Dad believed in success through hard work. He called it tush power. He said you just need to sit down and stay there until the work is done. And I remember having a breakdown in high school while writing my junior theme, my first 20-page research paper, and I was lying on the floor in a fetal position when he came into my room. He said, "Let's go. It's all about tush power." He helped me to my feet, and he sat me at my desk chair, and he put his hands on my shoulders and kept them there until I got to work. As an academic, he wrote grants to get his research funded, and he would sit in his office all night, weeks on end, writing and writing. My dad wrote and published countless articles and won many NIH grants for his research. I wondered when I was young if it was his intensity that turned his hair prematurely gray in his 30s, but I later understood it was genetics. Now I see my own strands of white hair, and I thank my dad because it makes my highlights last longer. For a man of science, Dad had a lot of superstitions. His middle brother, Harold, died at age 24 of cancer. It was a devastating loss that he seldom spoke of. My grandparents had a painting of the 3 boys when they were young, and that hung in their house. So my dad didn't believe in family portraits. He said they were bad luck. He didn't believe in changing or shortening your last name. Again, he said that was bad luck. I wish he had a superstition against eating cake and ice cream because it would have saved us both some extra pounds. My dad loved all things Jewish, the humor, the holidays, and most importantly, the food. He often spoke about going to the Lower East Side when he was young for deli, pickles, and knishes from Yonah Schimmel's, which I spelled wrong. He especially loved my mom's noodle kugel. And when my parents moved from Winnetka to the city, there was a deli around the corner from their house called Ashkenaz's. And he loved to pick up bagels and lox on Sunday mornings. It reminded him of his childhood. He would schmooze with Harvey, the guy behind the counter, and Harvey would say, "Doc, I think the NASDAQ will hit 3,000. And my dad would reply, "You're crazy, Harvey." And this repartee reminded him, and they said the same thing every week, reminded him of New York and the way people schmoozed in neighborhoods and delis, and my dad missed New York. He also loved to eat and going out to eat. When my parents met Lowell for the first time and they took us to Gibson's, my dad ordered shrimp cocktail, Lowell ordered shrimp cocktail. My dad ordered a porterhouse, Lowell ordered a porterhouse. And so it went. And after dinner, my dad said he was impressed with how much Lowell could eat. Lowell and I have been married for almost 25 years, and each and every year since the day we were married, my dad would tell me how I married a good man, how impressed he was with him as a husband, as a father, and a family man. He loved and appreciated Lowell so much, and he never stopped marveling at how much Lowell could eat. My dad had some interesting eating habits. You could say he was passionate about condiments. He loved salsa. He pronounced it salsa. He felt any dish was enhanced with salsas like baked potatoes, chicken, fish, Brussels sprouts. His next favorite condiment was ketchup. My dad used it on eggs, on challah, in matzo ball soup, pretty much any protein or vegetable. I would say, Dad, that's an insult to the cook. And he would say, no, it's just a little ketchup. He also loved applesauce on baked potatoes. When I was dating Lowell, I lived in the garden apartment of my parents' brownstone. Lowell would come over and smell the food my mom was making, my dad for dinner. Lowell had me call up to find out what was on the menu, and we would go upstairs and join my parents for dinner. My dad was always happy to have us join them. Even then, my dad worked long days. He was a formal guy who always wore a suit and tie. As soon as he got home, he changed into a tracksuit, made himself a martini. Lowell found this hilarious, but about 8 years ago, Lowell started putting on track pants when he got home from work and pouring himself a bourbon over ice. Who's funny now, Lowell? My dad was a Yankees fan through and through. While he lived the majority of his life in Illinois, he was a lukewarm Cubs fan at best. He told me stories about listening to Yankees games on the radio and remembered play-by-play all the big games. He loved Joe DiMaggio. Maybe 20 years ago, he ordered some black and white photos of DiMaggio from a New York Times ad to frame and put on the wall in his office. And this was a big deal because my parents were art collectors, and the only thing that hung on their walls were major works of art. When I was putting his cell phone away the other day, I saw that he had the MLB app. My dad was technologically challenged, but somehow we managed to follow baseball in an app. And I'm sure it was all about the Yankees. I would have to say that my parents' marriage appeared patriarchal. My dad worked and my mom was home to cook, manage the house and the kids. But you didn't have to look hard to see that my mom was not a stereotypical housewife. My mom was the real estate expert and the money manager, among other things. They were true partners. He often said that my mom could have run an investment fund. My dad valued my mom's opinion on all matters. He always showered praise on my mom. He said she was the best choice he ever made. He loved her energy and optimism. She balanced him out. He said time and time again that the greatest thing about my mom is that she is unapologetically herself. He appreciated and valued real people, those without pretense. He called her Babe, or H. Whenever she was standing at the sink, he would come up behind her and wrap his arms around her. He loved buying gifts for her and taking her shopping. I remember for one of my mom's birthday, he asked me to run an errand with him, and we walked down Michigan Avenue to the Chanel store, and we picked out a purse for her. He was always surprising her with gifts. He planned a surprise birthday party for her 40th. My dad never planned anything. He was a terrible dancer, but he happily marched to the dance floor holding her hand and held her close and swayed to the music. They rarely fought or yelled. My mom and I once drove up to New Buffalo, Michigan for something to do one afternoon, and when we came back, my dad was informed they had just bought land up there to build a house. My dad loved my mom for her sense of adventure and risk-taking. I remember one time when I was around 7 or 8, my mom cut herself on a door lock, and she called out for my dad. And my dad came running and was at her side in seconds. It was in that moment, at that young age, that I understood that my dad was there for my mom and would always protect her. Dad was a history buff. He majored in history in college. He was a man of science and letters. It was impossible to debate with him because with his photographic memory, he could fact-check you. His knowledge went back to ancient history, so needless to say, he could beat you at any trivia game. If I complained about a president and their policies on some issue like immigration, he would tell me what administration was worse and have statistics to back it up. He talked at the TV when Face the Nation was on. He would yell, "Not true? Ugh, come on. This is total BS." It's no secret he was right-leaning, but he didn't identify with either party. He called himself an independent. He was so disgusted by the state of politics today and divisiveness in Washington and across the country. He hated cancel culture, safe spaces, and trigger warnings. He thought real learning was born out of respectful debate and uncomfortable conversations. And when it came to my kids, my dad only had the kindest things to say. He talked with them all the time, and his work schedule slowed. He showed up for their school events. The only time he ever came close to bragging in his life was when he spoke about his grandchildren. He loved that Ethan was a great golfer. He was impressed with Ethan's healthy eating and cooking skills, although he liked to joke that Ethan ate rabbit food. He admired Ethan's easygoing attitude and quiet ways. My dad and Rachel were very close. My dad loved her curiosity and adventurous spirit. He relied on Rachel to explain cryptocurrency and NFTs. He often told me that the greatest thing about my kids is that they were mensches. And that he would say, you don't have to worry about anything. They're going to do great in life. He believed that it wasn't the things one acquired or achieved that mattered most. It was the kind of person you were, and that was to be admired and valued. To say my dad was an introvert would be an understatement. He was happiest at home, reading the paper, listening to jazz or classical music. He would happily go along with any plans my mom made, but home is where he was most at peace. The only other place he loved as much was New York. When I was growing up, my parents bought a home in Florida. He wasn't in love with the place, but he understood my mom wanted to be close to family and needed the sunshine. But man, did he come to love Florida. He loved the weather and the casual dress code. He couldn't wait to get down there every year, and I would ask him during our morning calls, how's the weather? And he would say, just another beautiful day in paradise. My dad was the kindest man. He never spoke ill of anyone, except maybe Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid. Each and every time he met one of Lowell and my friends, he had kind words to say about them. He didn't speak of regrets. He just tried to right the wrongs of his past by being a better person, better dad, husband, uncle, friend, cousin, so on. He was not easy to anger. He was quick to forgive. He was humble and unpretentious. He never forgot where he came from. He was brilliant, but never used his intelligence to make others feel small. He was quiet and introverted. He was an observer of the human condition. Integrity meant everything, and he was a man of his word. He was a class act. He had a silent laugh, and when he was hysterical, he'd slap his thigh and tear up. I loved watching my dad laugh hysterically. A long time ago, they used to have auctions live on TV for public television for Channel 11. My dad loved Channel 11. All his favorite shows were on that channel, except Star Trek. I don't know why, but we watched the auctions as a family. One year, an auction item was a puppet. You remember that? From a children's show. And then for some reason, the next 5 or 6 auction items, someone just kept tossing the puppet into the picture. And this cracked my dad up. And each time the puppet appeared, next to an autographed baseball or a new car, he would slap his thighs harder and cried and laughed, and we all laughed with him. He had a dry sense of humor. My mom called it bush humor because you never knew if he was kidding or not. If he was over at our house and he was cold, he would say, here's $1 for your gas bill. Not everyone got his jokes, but I did. My dad was an intellectual, and he took us to the craziest things. He loved to see foreign films. When I was 10, I think, and my brother was 12, we went downtown to watch a 3-hour movie in Japanese with subtitles. I remember sitting in the Wilmette Theater once to see an English film that my dad had chosen, and my grandpa Max was visiting us from New York. My grandpa stood up in the middle of the movie and walked out saying, I can't understand an effing thing they're saying. The first opera my dad took me to at age 8 or 9 was by Wagner, and it was 4 hours long. There is a hole in my heart that will never heal. I'll miss our morning calls and our political debates. I'll miss his laugh and his kind, watery eyes. I'll miss his humming. And every morning that I retrieve the Wall Street Journal from my front step, When I see Cheerios in the store or apple pie at the farmer's market, I'll think of him. And when I look into my kids' eyes, or my own reflection in the mirror, I will see my dad. My dad knew I loved him with all my heart, and that gives me great comfort.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Rachel, I invite you to come forward. And Ethan, you can come together. Come up together.
For those who don't know, I am Grandpa Stanley's favorite grandson. I am the only grandson, but that is besides the point. The fact that he's not with us breaks my heart, but the fact that he taught me and our entire family what it means to really love someone will help me heal and go on. From my early days, I looked up to my grandfather. While I may not always have shown it, I always looked up to him. He was a walking manual full of medical information, and I took full advantage of that. I asked him questions about medications, symptoms that I was experiencing, and he knew exactly what to do. My favorite thing was to ask really bizarre questions and see if he knew the answer. I asked, hypothetically, if I were to have a bowel movement that was a total of 3 feet long, would that mean that 3 feet of my intestine was filled by that? He looked at me and laughed, and then answered yes. Not only was he the most intelligent person I have met, but he was also an incredible human being who left his mark on everyone he met. I just want to tell what kind of person my grandfather was. He loved his family. He was always happy to hear my voice when I called, whether it was just to check up on him or ask any questions about medical reasons. He was passionate about the news, like a lot. He had a cycle when he was watching TV, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, and then either golf or tennis, depending if there was a tournament, and would go through it multiple times in the day. I joked around with him by saying that he watched news like a sports game, because he would start talking to the TV newscaster like it was an umpire at a baseball game that just made a bad call. He also cared about the people around him. He got interested in my fashion, and we bought him a matching Nike t-shirt. When he saw it, he immediately put it on and loved the idea that we both were matching. In his mind, he was becoming fashionable, and I'll give it to him. He was all of these things and so much more. While I'm not sure what the future may look like without Grandpa Stanley, I know that I'm a better person because of his love. I only hope that I can live up to the example of love, strength, character, and integrity that he set for all of us. While he is no longer here to say that he's proud of me, I carry his strength in my heart. The kindest compliment I hope to hear in the future is someday is to say, your grandfather would be proud.
Perfect. Okay, this is going to be hard. Okay. Here, thank you. Okay. I'm fortunate enough to say that I have few best friends in life. One is my mom. One is Katie Carmen, who I'm grateful is really here today. And one was Grandpa Stanley. We shared many things: chronic dandruff, eczema, arthritis, many medical issues. You know what they say about how it skips a generation. But also a love for art, Frank Sinatra, dirty martinis with extra olives, intellectual conversations, reading, a natural curiosity, and everything bagels. We were similar in an uncanny way. As a little girl, I remember always finding Grandpa Stanley with a tape recorder, deeply reclining in his office chair, whether it be in his small basement office in Bellevue or in his tropical office in Boca Raton, Florida. There, he would record details about his patients in a very kind, soft-spoken, yet serious tone. And I would sit there and watch, and in between recordings, pepper him with questions. A habit I still have and credit to him today. It was clear that Grandpa Stanley always cared about his work, and the people who worked with him and for him, but he also deeply cared about his patients. And more importantly, over the years, he instilled the value in hard work. Grandpa Stanley was a self-made man. He often talked about the importance of education and its power to change one's life. When he and Grandma Harriet were raising my mom and Uncle Richie, they moved to Winnetka specifically for the schools. Someone at Northwestern, where my grandpa taught, told him that Winnetka had the best education system, so that's where they moved. And when Ethan and I were growing up, and we were pulled out of public school to attend an innovative progressive private school where we would become lifelong learners, I credit that decision both to my parents, but also to Grandpa Stanley. And I'm not 100% sure how much he played a role in the decision, but at least I know that he always shaped the course of my education. Ethan and I knew Grandpa's life story at a very young age. Growing up, I latched onto his story. It always stuck with me, and I often wrote about it in school papers. Both of Grandpa's parents never attended college. He grew up in the Bronx in a tenement. Was it a tenement? We're not really sure, but that's what we were told and how it was described. But he was always proud of where he came from. At a young age, a teacher identified Grandpa Stanley's talent and intelligence, which set him on a path to apply and get accepted to the Bronx High School of Science, receive a degree from Brandeis, and eventually attend medical school. He did it all on his own, all through hard work and a little PMA, which stands for Positive Mental Attitude. This acronym, the 3 letters PMA, were passed down to me from Grandpa Stanley. When I was auditioning for a competitive hip-hop dance team in 3rd grade, which is hilarious, he shared that motto, PMA, to remind me to believe in myself and channel a positive attitude. Since then, I've written PMA on every single test or quiz I've ever taken. Although I don't find myself taking standardized tests today, I still carry PMA with me every day. And that motto has become who I am as a person. It is how I show up, and every time I think of Grandpa Stanley. I will always thank him and remember him for that. He was the smartest man, and I mean that wholeheartedly. There was no one smarter than Grandpa Stanley. He was truly a lifelong learner, whether it was American history, infectious diseases, Cuban art, or my recent cryptocurrency rabbit hole. He never stopped learning. He would seek out every opportunity to learn and would always ask questions. I remember him listening to the great courses growing up, and I remember him attending continuing education at Northwestern, learning about international relations. He was a voracious reader, which was passed down to me. He started every morning with a bowl of Cheerios with sliced strawberries, bananas, and blueberries in the Wall Street Journal. He loved jazz, and he knew so much about it. Every time we got into his car, the Seriously Sinatra Sirius XM channel was playing. And I grew to love jazz too, and I've never changed the channel. We even talked about technology and Silicon Valley. He asked me what I thought about Twitter and if it was a worthy stock. And he would always update me about the price of Bitcoin throughout the past year, since he knew I was a purchaser of that. Although a doctor by trade, Grandpa's love for the arts never fell short. He passed on a love for culture, art, and music to his grandchildren, encouraging me to pursue creative endeavors at a young age, and even nicknaming me Rachel Kandinsky after the artist Kandinsky himself. He was what I would call the perfect blend of art and science. He was analytical and logical, and creative in spirit, and both Grandpa Stanley and Grandma Harriet made it their life's mission to travel the world and collect art together. And they shared that world with us, exploring museums and galleries hand in hand. Whenever we visited galleries, Grandpa Stanley would always pause and ask me what I thought of work. He took my opinion to heart, even purchasing pieces that only had my full support. If it wasn't Rachel Cantor approved, it was a no-go. He taught me how to look at art and analyze it, to look for something deeper, and to not impulsively buy, to only buy things that you loved. But most importantly, he was an exceptionally kind man. Although he might have been hard on my mom growing up, we never saw that side of him. I remember him as the kindest, most loving grandfather. He loved his children and grandchildren, and he provided lots of love and affection. I cherished our early morning breakfast together, where we would read the paper, and the evenings where I would tiptoe into his bedroom for a goodnight kiss and hug, always finding him watching Star Trek or an action film. Grandpa was his own person. We would often find him humming along to his own tune. I never really knew what he was singing, but it always had a little bop to it. Oftentimes throughout my life, I've felt like an outcast, but Grandpa Stanley always made me feel like I was not alone. He reminded me that I was exceptional and could set my mind to anything. When I started writing publicly, he was a loyal subscriber. He even read my newsletter at Morning Brew, calling me to say, "I read your blog today." It was always a newsletter, but I kind of prefer the term blog, to be honest. It's a little more endearing. He was never ashamed or embarrassed of where he came from or who he was. He loved everything tomato, from ketchup to tomato soup, even spooning salsa straight from the jar. He always wore aviator sunglasses that were too big for his face. And whenever I called, he always said thank you for calling, which I often found strange because I wanted to call him, not because it felt like an obligation, but because I enjoyed every conversation. In those calls, he and Grandma would often ask for updates on my life, particularly about my social life, which I recently learned is often code for dating, or how work was doing. He knew I cared about my job, and we would talk about startup life, my investment portfolio, and my life in New York. On Sunday, the day that Grandpa passed away, I called him to chat. We talked about my recent trip to Arizona while he was watching tennis with Mom. And I mentioned how my taxes are a shit show because of my cryptocurrency, a comment which made him laugh for minutes on end. Although I feel the pain and sadness and a hole in my heart for losing a best friend and one of the people I admire most in life, I have solace knowing I spoke to him on the day he passed and that I made him laugh. I'm very proud to be his granddaughter. I'll never forget the lessons he imparted, and I will always carry with me PMA for the rest of my life.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I can say to both of you that your grandfather would be very, very proud of your words from your heart. In the Jewish tradition, he loved everything Jewish. In the Jewish tradition, we have a prayer called the Misha, Baracha, healing prayer. We would often pray for healing of body. When someone was sick, we prayed for their healing of body. But in addition to that, we always pray for the healing of spirit, because body and soul go hand in hand. And that we need both the body and the soul to live. And so when he was sick, we prayed for his healing of body. And now we pray together for his healing of spirit, for all of our healing of spirit with the Misha Barach prayer. Hum along.
Misha Barach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
As you heard from those closest to him, Stanley was born in the Bronx, along with two brothers, Harold, who died far too young of cancer, and David, who died 6 years ago. He was close with his mom, and like Stanley, she was gentle and loving. Grew up in a tenement or a small apartment, and Stanley helped his dad on weekends in the furniture business. His dad worked hard putting the boys through college, and Stanley sent back home $5 a week when he could. After graduating from Bronx High School of Science, Jewish quotas were in effect in many schools, and Stanley went to Brandeis. His wealthy roommate from Westchester couldn't believe where Stanley grew up when he picked him up to go back to Waltham. And I love that Eleanor Roosevelt was at his graduation. Stanley had an uncle who lived on City Island who was a doctor and was a great role model. He attended medical school at Pitt and graduated second in his class. He chose infectious disease and wanted to be an academician more than a practicing doctor. And I loved that at his residency at NYU, which wasn't hard enough, so he decided to go to Yale instead. At his residency at NYU, he met a young doctor, a good guy, a political hack. Those were his own words, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He made the residents under him work really hard. He was tough, he was fair. He even used his own dining room to take blood every Sunday. That was Stanley. Both Harriet and Stanley's dads worked in the furniture business together, and both families had homes in the country in Monroe, New York, where 18-year-old Stanley met 15-year-old Harriet. They corresponded while he was at Brandeis, got engaged when Harriet was in college and Stanley was in medical school, and were married in 1963. In Flushing at Temple Gates of Prayer, as their rabbi and their temple were not available. Stanley served our country with distinction during Vietnam at Fort Detrick. He then researched at Yale, took a job teaching in Chicago at Northwestern. He raised his family in Winnetka. He never considered changing his name. It was a tough community for a Jewish doctor and a Jewish family. Blessed with an amazing wife and wonderful children, he helped both of you with your homework, especially math and science. He encouraged you to ask lots of questions. He threw himself into everything. He didn't just like art, he studied art. He didn't just like wine, he studied wine. He didn't just like jazz, he knew all about jazz. Everyone he met remembered him. He was a great listener. He loved his children and grandchildren so very much. He wanted all of you to always be learning something, to have lots of interest, to work hard, to not to judge, to follow your natural curiosity. He valued hard work and wanted you to do the same. He wanted you to have and to be a moral compass, to have a PMA, positive mental attitude, to have lots of interests, to live life with integrity, to see all sides of an issue, to have lots of interests. He loved all music and hummed along. He loved coming to Am Shalom for Simchat Torah with the Maxwell Street Klezmer Band, and he loved to travel. I first met you when I was the young assistant rabbi at Temple Sholem, and you were members of Temple Sholem, even before your children were married. I remember meeting you. I remember your dedication and your devotion to each other. And I was so delighted to have you travel and to join Am Shalom in a trip that we led to Cuba. I must say I was surprised when you brought 10 friends with you as well. And you filled the whole bus with your people. but they were fun. And you reminded me, I love that he was wearing his aviator glasses and someone in the cigar factory wanted to trade him a Cohiba for those glasses. Not a good deal, and he knew that. He loved to read. He always wanted to learn. He was interested in everything. He was fair. He just wished people weren't so divided. He never held back forgiveness. He loved all things Jewish. He was proud. He was strong. A man of routine, Stanley got softer and softer as he got older and older. And as you heard, the skilled and talented infectious disease doctor got a bad infection. And over these last 7 months, after foot surgery in September, he fought, he tried, he did all that he could. In January, he was strong enough to come back down to Florida. He was still in pain, yet he was feeling good. On Sunday, he spent the afternoon on the couch watching tennis. I love that Rachel called to check in. And I love how you began, which is how I'll end, with you curled up next to your dad on the couch on an afternoon, watching tennis and talking, nursing a bad migraine headache. A few hours later, he died peacefully in his sleep. No fuss, no fanfare, there wasn't any pain, there was no struggle. I have a book in my library called Living Your Dying that posits a person should always die the same way that they live. And when that happens, while death is always difficult, it's a good thing when you die the same way that you live. He died the same way that he lived. He called the shots till the very end, exactly the way it should be. On the wall of Am Shalom, there's a beautiful teaching that we see every time we walk into the building. It asks a question by the prophet Micah. What is it that God really requires of us? When we think about it, what is it that God really wants from us? Micah's answer is absolutely brilliant. Just 3 things: do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Do justice. Do what you love. Be passionate about what you love. Care about justice. He did that every day of his life. Love mercy. Bring healing to people. Help people. Find cures for infectious disease. Be kind. He did that every day of his life. And walk humbly with God. In a home filled with true masterpieces, that wasn't important. It was family, it was friends, it was community, it was learning, it was teaching, it was love. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. When our body is gone, our good deeds will remain behind. Those who knew us will repeat those good deeds, both in their own deeds and in the kind words of guiding others. Their breath shall carry those kind words to those whom they shall meet as they go on their way. And we shall all live forever. Hallelujah. Please rise. El Malei Rachamim, God full of compassion, dwelling in the heights and in the depths, grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence. To our loved one, to Stanley G. Rabinowitz, who has entered eternity, may he find refuge forever under the shadow of God's wings. May his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And together we say the mourner's Kaddish. For those who are watching online, we ask you to join with us. For those who are here and those going to the cemetery, we will have the opportunity to say Kaddish again. But to give everyone the opportunity to say Kaddish together in his honor and his memory, we do so now. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ve'almad divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei kol beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mavarach le'olam omei omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh, V'yid hadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery located at 9900 Grosse Point Road here in Skokie. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections, and please do not speak or text on a cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. The Shiva will continue at the Cantor residence at 793 Sheridan Road in Glencoe. They'll be together today from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. Memorial contributions to Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, the efforts to provide medical care in Ukraine. For those of you who are joining us online, that information is on our website. For those of you who are here, that information is on the service folder. At this time, I invite everyone to rise and stand in place as the pallbearers come forward. And as we escort the casket of Dr. Rabinowitz from the chapel, you may return to your cars. Pallbearers, you're just going to follow this ceremony?
Oseh Shalom Dimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'imru Amen. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael.